Welcome back to the Astro-Insights podcast. In part one of my conversation with Tobias Churton, we learned about the mysterious and often misunderstood 16th century movement known as Rosicrucianism and its connection both to the scientific and Protestant revolutions and the great conjunctions of 1603 and 1623, which helped to catalyse it into greater public awareness. In part two, we're widening the lens to consider the social and cultural reverberations of Rosicrucianism, including the so-called Paris scare of 1623 and what it can tell us about the link between crowd psychology and millenarianism, as well as its link to several well-known conspiracy theories, such as the Shakespeare codes and the Illuminati. We also explore how drama and spectacle have the potential to influence group behaviour both positively and negatively, how art and artists can inspire political and social change, and how the imagination can both fuel misleading beliefs like conspiracy theories and potentially guide people towards deeper spiritual awareness through higher states of consciousness. Joining me again this week is Tobias Churton, author of The Invisible History of the Rosicrucians. According to Tobias, one of the most fascinating things about the Rosicrucian furore was the way the debate, while often mad, immoderate, extreme, bigoted, opportunistic, magical, or fanatical, nevertheless rose above the ordinary political, social, and religious concerns of the day. People got high on the idea of it all. Indeed, some later public commentators would refer to this wave of collective enthusiasm as Rosymania, a curious but appropriate choice of term, given Jupiter's astrological association with religion and belief systems, and its tendency to amplify, which can turn faith into fervour. Another interesting thing is why its creator, or if you prefer, scribe, reacted so strongly against the excitement generated by his creation. But then again, as Tobias points out, the Beatles soon tired of Beatlemania. John Lennon, the Andrew of that particular movement, would rather have smashed the idol than have it worshipped. Here, Tobias and I explore the unorthodox way that Rosicrucianism was made public, and the unforeseen consequences, both positive and negative, that this would have, both for its author and for the world. And given the cosmic context in which this all occurred, we also consider different modes of knowledge and the nature of subjectivity. For instance, do our creations ever truly belong to us? Or do ideas and symbols actually have a life of their own? And could Jung's theory of the collective unconscious and archetypal possession offer us some useful guidelines on what to do when things go wrong? So let's zoom out and explore this intriguing historical phenomenon and its connection to our present-day world. What lessons can we learn from it about surviving an era characterized by post-truth politics, polarization, propaganda wars, manufactured nihilism, and mob mentality? And more optimistically, what does it teach us about cultivating hope as a form of resistance, the mysterious interconnectedness of all things, and the unflagging resilience of the perennial philosophy? As we learned in part one of the story, the legend of the Rosicrucian Brotherhood emerged from what's become collectively known as the Rosicrucian Manifestos, a trilogy of Gnostic and alchemical texts widely attributed to the German theologian, writer, and Protestant utopian Johann Valentin Andreae. These were published anonymously between 1614 and 1617. However, what's less well known is the fact that their author never intended for them to be published. Despite what its title might suggest, the first in the series, the Fama Fraternitatis, or Fame of the Brotherhood, was originally circulated amongst a small group of German intellectuals known as the Tübingen Circle, in manuscript form in about 1610, but was later pirated and printed in Cassel in 1614. Tobias explains the unorthodox and unauthorized manner in which this text was made public. But it's your contention, though, that he never intended to sort of publish it widely.
I'm sure. No, because that almost certainly somebody, it may be his most revered friend, Tobias Hess, who was a doctor of law and medicine at Tübingen, who was his absolute hero. And there's very good grounds for thinking he bases the character of Frater C.R. on Tobias Hess. It may be that Tobias Hess distributed, because it was a manuscript, And
Yes.
that we know that a man called Adam Hasselmeyer
Mm-hmm.
obtained one in the Tyrol in 1610, and he's living under Habsburg control.
Right.
Adam Hasselmeyer is an alchemist and doctor and notary public for the Archduke Maximilian, and he writes to Archduke Maximilian, a Catholic, can you believe it, and says, I want to go in search of the true Rosicrucian Brotherhood. I think I know where to go. And interestingly, Maximilian thinks, who's this nutcase? Contacts the chief inquisitor at Innsbruck, Hippolyte Guarinoni, and Guarinoni immediately puts out a warrant for his arrest, and he was sentenced to the galleys, where he was chained. If anyone's seen Ben-Hur, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, yes.
You know, pulling oars in the most dire conditions, and he was there until 1617.
Shame.
So he had 7 years. How he survived, he didn't know. He was let out due to a secret deal with Antonio de Medici. So the first person who goes in search of the Rosicrucian Manifesto ends up in the galleys. That tells you something about the spiritual implications,
yes,
and the nature of these times. Now, he had a friend called Benedictus Figulus, who, interestingly, Andrei described as a charlatan and an adventurer and a globetrotter, meaning he's always on his travels, and he regarded him as generally a troublemaker. Mm-hmm. Now, Figulus had edited Heinrich Kunrat's rather stunning production, the Amphitheatre of Chemistry. English is the English title.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Which has these extraordinary illustrations, which are so much better than the text itself. But Kunrat was an enthusiastic alchemist who believed that Christ is the philosopher's stone and is everywhere to be found in nature, which chimes in rather well with the Gospel of Thomas.
And Paracelsus.
Gospel, split a piece of wood and I am there. So that also ties in with this whole idea of the spiritual effulgence of the stars being manifested as a new chemical light in nature, which, if you knew how to interpret, would make you a new man and become a true initiate into a brotherhood. This came out, this 1592, that came out before the Rosicrucian material became available.
Okay.
But of course, the Rosicrucian material ties into the mentality that's already being established by men like Kunrat. Now, Figulus was new Kunrat. He actually looks after the library of Adam Hasselmeyer, who's in the galleys, and brings it to Germany and brings it to Kassel. And we think that it was through Figulus and one of the professors at Gießen University, who was Johannes Kombach, who is responsible for getting the main printer of Kassel, who needed Maurice von Hessen, the Landgrave's permission to do so, to publish the Farmer. Now, when the Farmer is published, it doesn't come out alone. It comes out with two other main documents. One is an account of what's happened to Herr Hasselmeyer.
That's right.
That's a very important thing. Frances Yates never really understood the significance of that. And she leapt on the fact that it was published with an extract from Traiano Boccalini's News from Parnassus, which was a production of the Venetian Republic at the time, and is a satirical piece on the Council of Trent of the 1560s, which was meant to reform Catholic doctrine and find some sort of way to ending the catastrophe of the split in the Church, the Reformation.
Right.
But of course, all it did was, shore up the existing papal edifice. The chapter that is printed with the Farmer is called "On the Reformation of the Whole Wide World." So then an enormous furore began, and hundreds of pamphlets flew across all of Europe, mostly the Protestant Europe.
Given the subversive nature of its content, together with the controversial way in which the Farmer was published, is it any wonder that the people of Paris were more than a little anxious and excitable when, at the much-anticipated Great Conjunction of 1623, a secretive spiritual sect associated with the symbol of the Rose Cross began to make its debut on the world stage, just as Kepler had predicted in 1604. Although their existence remained unverifiable, the public response to the announcement was marked. Some citizens reacted with curiosity, others with concern. For believers, their appearance in alignment with the 1623 celestial signs only served to legitimize their claims. Others, however, were more skeptical, even hostile to the idea. Indeed, the placards, plastered all over the city announcing their presence, sparked a mixture of fear and fascination, leading to a flurry of supportive pamphlets, including the Summum Bonum, published under a pseudonym by Robert Flood, mainly in response to denunciations from men like Descartes and Mersenne, and even police investigations. But did the secret brotherhood actually exist? And was the Tübingen Circle even involved in what Francis Yates would later refer to as the Paris Scare of 1623?
He had no control of once the work was pirated, and at one point, 2 years after the printing, he says, "We now see a whole new set of actors on the stage," and all these other people have started writing about it.
Yes, so it took on a life of its own, which I think almost reflects this idea that nature and that everything around us is conscious, and that the symbolism itself has its own agency. So once it was kind of out in the world, it started to kind of do things that were completely beyond his control, and then you have the great conjunctions and things happening which take it to another level. But they set it in motion, that they bring this.
Well, he uses the excitement of those conjunctions as a kind of color, as you would light a particular stage if you're putting on a play. Yes. You bring in certain colors or certain forms to create the kind of atmosphere. He says it's a ludibrium. It was always a ludibrium. A ludibrium is the ludi. It means a sort of a joke, but with a sort of satirical and serious meaning to it. Mm-hmm. So he never wanted it to be taken literally.
Interesting.
He's great. He loved theatre. He was a huge admirer of British English travelling players, and great admiration for English theatre. And he realised that theatre was a means of conveying truth, symbolically or through mythology, or parabolically, as Jesus did, by making comparisons of characters and behaviours and motivations. And so he saw theatre as a great teaching aid, as did Comenius.
Similar to the Greeks, that sort of saw theatre as this. You could move people. You could enact catharsis. It became almost like a form of healing.
Yes, I mean, and Eleusis, of course, was a theatrical performance. Though they probably had ergot of rye in the wine, so they'd be tripping as well.
Yes,
according to R. Gordon Wasson, who knew about such mycology and these things in the ancient world.
Yes, interesting. But yet there's a ritual aspect to it as well, that you're actually sort of putting yourself through a ritual.
Yes, and in the same way that you have with alchemy in this period, there is a ritual aspect to that.
The short answer to the question about what happened in Paris then is that no, the Tübingen Circle were not involved in the strange events that unfolded during the Great Conjunction of 1623, which makes what occurred even more of an enigma. For the historian Francis Yates, the so-called Paris Scare represents a cultural flashpoint, one in which a spontaneous eruption of esoteric knowledge, combined with celestial events and apocalyptic expectations, exploded in the public imagination to reveal hidden tensions and shifting paradigms within European society. For her, this moment was not merely a bout of public hysteria or conspiratorial superstition, but rather an archetypal expression of something deeper within the public psyche, a longing for greater spiritual and intellectual freedom, and a need for social change, an impulse that would later manifest itself in the scientific revolution, and some would argue, both the English Civil War and the French Revolution. But what of Andriai's experience? Whatever his reasons for initially writing the Rosicrucian manifestos, once they were out there, his creation took on a life of its own, thanks in part to the amplifying quality of the celestial events which unfolded between 1602 and 1623. These propelled the Rosicrucian Brotherhood from the purely imaginary into the realm of the archetypal. Christopher McIntosh has called Rosicrucianism an egregore, something that just grows and grows over time with a momentum of its own, a rolling stone that gathers much moss of many hues. You could argue that rather like a snowball, the Gnostic and Hermetic ideas that had once animated Renaissance thought and were then incorporated into Rosicrucianism had a contagious quality. Commenting on this suggestion in his book, Tobias writes, "If this omnivorous characteristic be included in the definition of Rosicrucianism, then one may justly include any movement or phenomena that can be shown to be derived from something preceding it, even if it seems a long way from the first utterance, as in a game of telephone. And indeed, this type of phenomenon is something we would easily recognize today through our experience of social media, when certain ideas or memes that touch a nerve or resonate with the current zeitgeist instantly go viral." Similar to the term Zeitgeist, which is German for the defining mood or spirit of the moment, egregores are essentially a type of collective thought form that evolve out of the emotions or ideas generated by groupthink. Derived from the Greek word gregoreo, which means to be awake or to watch, egregores often go on to develop a certain degree of agency. In theosophical terms, you could say that they epitomize the notion that thoughts become things, which says something about the power of the creative imagination. Egregores can be positive or negative, depending on the shared ideals and intentions of the group who create them. If you consider historical phenomena that have grouped groups of people in the past, from fascism to Beatlemania to the civil rights and environmental movements, then the concept of an egregore is actually not that unusual. Although he never spoke directly of egregores, Carl Jung's work on the collective unconscious and archetypes provides a rich framework for understanding how shared psychic energies can manifest as autonomous, quasi-living entities, very much in line with the concept of egregores. Within a Jungian context, egregores could be considered to be similar to activated collective archetypes, psychic patterns that can gain strength and autonomy through collective attention and emotional investment, and can, under the right set of circumstances, almost appear to possess people. Often, these are catalyzed via a combination of unusual circumstances, powerful ideas, and emotionally charged events, such as a war or peak experience, which under the right circumstances combine to arouse powerful instinctual drives, inspire hope, or create bonding experiences that override our normal modes of being and thinking. But sometimes, like the flash mobs that can form on social media, or the outbreaks of panic or group hysteria we sometimes see in the wake of pandemics or financial disasters, these can also spin out of control, leading to social contagion, or in modern parlance, conspiracy theories.
But it does seem as though Andreas didn't intend necessarily for this to be a movement, and yet
No,
it
no,
turns
he'd
into
have
one.
hated it. He tried to end it. He wrote several works where he said, "I wish the ridiculous bells of this ludicrous thing would just go up in smoke, with all the loonies let out of the bag." And funnily enough, Andrei always referred to the people who misunderstood the Rosicrucian material. He called them the curiosi.
Interesting.
People who suffered from an excessive curiosity and a lack of intelligence.
And I mean, in that sense, you today you would probably call those people conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, oh, very much so. They are the curiosity of today. You know, they
Mm.
see significant. Oh, what's that? Was it E.M. Forster? You know, connect, only connect. Well, they connect everything. You know, everything's a sign, everything's a symbol.
Yes.
All of this stuff about so and so decoded, Da Vinci code this, they encoded. I mean, there's
Yes.
endless. And you can always say, well, you can't prove it's not true.
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
for me to prove anything. You haven't proved anything yourself. They just draw out connections. They rely hugely on the ignorance of their readers.
Absolutely. I mean, again, when I was doing research into Rosicrucianism, I came across this quite a lot with things like codes in William Shakespeare
Ah,
and sort of links to the Royal Society and this kind of conspiracy of Illuminati
yeah.
that was sort of really running the show. And yeah, it
Well,
does.
that the conspiracy of the Illuminati starts very early. We're talking about 1651 when
Hmm.
Merrick Casaubon publishes John Dee's diaries. Uh,
Ah.
Again, to show that this science and this Rosicrucian thing that was coming in from Europe was satanic.
Hmm.
And he reproduced the angelical conferences of John Dee and
Right.
Edward Kelly and
Yes.
published them. And the government was trying to stop the book coming out.
Goodness,
Yeah.
because they thought it was going to cause sort of a riot.
Well, it was just regarded as how can I say incredibly alarmist that
Yes.
these conferences with angels have been going on and predicting the future.
Interesting. And William Lilly actually sort of talks about those experiments with Edmund Kelly in his memoir, and he claims that the reason that it failed was that Edmund Kelly was a vicious person, and the angels didn't want anything to do with him, and that he kind of points to Dee being full of pride, and that was an issue in terms of the way that he approached things. But he also kind of points back to Rosicrucianism, because he kind of tells the story about how he heard through, some merchant who had worked in Germany and had heard from via this person and that person that a monk had visited Dee and Kelly in Prague, I think, and had he'd sort of knocked on the door and he'd asked to see Dee and Dee had refused, and so he told Kelly to tell Dee that Dee had written a book called the Monas Hieroglyphica, which he hadn't written and which he didn't understand, and that the friar would like to explain it to him. And Dee kept sending him away, and eventually Kelly, supposedly, according to Lilly, he consorted with the friar and then attained the philosopher's stone and made some gold or whatever it was, and then poisoned the friar and broke with Dee. And so the whole thing kind of came to a mess. But I just thought it was really interesting that he was talking, that he kept alluding to Rosicrucianism.
I think Lilo Maquette's written a book on how to activate John Dee's angel summoning. I don't know. So it's not my cup of tea. I think the opportunities for self-deception in such things is so enormous that and I've met people who sit down and think that they're talking to the dead, and all this, and I could never see any benefit from it except they just got dottier and dottier.
Well, I mean, what I'm getting at more is that it's the intention behind it. I mean, I don't think that Dee succeeded, and I do think that there's sort of a desperate need for a kind of a common consensus reality and a language where we can reconnect and talk about this type of thing again. Yeah, I mean, language is something I'm really quite fascinated by. And it seemed to me that was something that John Dee was also fascinated with too, with his conversations with angels and then the Monas Hieroglyphica.
What is it Blake says, we see us through chinks in a cavern, and he uses the Platonic image
Yes,
of
the cave.
that we're seeing through chinks in a cavern. Now,
Mm.
the problem with all this is simply ignorance. Especially in a culture like ours with this so-called democracy, which is more of a Babel, in my opinion, a babel of competing voices who never listen to each other, who don't share a fundamental language and on understanding.
Yes.
And in that field, the pragmatic Western model has been to say, well, we'd better not discuss religion because it's a source of conflict.
Yes. Have you ever come across the work of a chap called Tom Cheetham?
No.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting in light of all of this, because he kind of talks about um, the idea that since Descartes we've become obsessed with the idea of objectivity, and that we cannot conceive of the idea of subjectivity outside of ourselves, and that's part of the prison that we put ourselves in, where we feel disconnected from the cosmos and from everything else. But in fact, um, subjectivity is a sort of engagement with many subjects. Whether
I've never really bought that distinction anyway myself. One became aware of it as it was a useful reductionist tool. Oh, that's merely subjective, meaning it's your personal thought. Then I would like to know, in what sense have you objectified something to be able to have knowledge of it? Are you outside of the world that you can see the limits of a thing?
Yes. But I mean, that's scientism.
Yes.
That
It's,
that sort of takes up that idea, that believes that you can sort of detach yourself from what you're.
well, you can, and you end up with a scientific universe, and they can't understand why they can't find God in it.
Yes, or why they've replaced God
Well,
with the natural
he's
laws.
drained out of the perceptual system.
Mm,
He's been
mm,
removed before they start. I mean,
yes. I mean, and the other thing that Cheetham kind of says is he looks at the alchemists, he looks at Jung, and he talks about the idea of the star in man, the Paracelsian idea, and how Jung kind of took this as sort of he adopted this idea into his philosophy and sort of put it in the unconscious of man, the self, but without realizing that he had divorced it from the cosmology and had forgotten that there was a middle level, so the level of soul. And so he was also enacting the split, and then what kind of happens is that this light in man becomes Lucifer, that this is sort of the end kind of project, or the end result of a kind of a humanism that's become detached from anything else, and it's all about
well,
the individual.
it's materialism.
Yes,
Materialism in
and
the true sense of the word, not in the way people think of it today. They think materialism is the pleasure of objects or luxuries or some money. It isn't. Materialism is the philosophy that the only things that exist are matter, and that which cannot be demonstrated to have what they would say objective existence, or existence as an object,
mhm.
doesn't exist, or is simply discounted. But in fact, everything that ever mattered to a person really is invisible. You know,
Yes.
loyalty, love, all these things, they can be demonstrated, but the actual quality in forming that demonstration is invisible.
Yes, it's
No,
can only be
and
experienced.
everything that was ever done was first, as Blake says, that which was done was first imagined.
But I mean, it's interesting that you talk about imagination, because this is really sort of the bedrock of um, what was happening with the Rosicrucians. It's the reason why the imagination sort of captured.
The imagination does allow us to re-enchant the world.
It does, and it's also, if you read people like Henry Corbin, it is the basis of not of gnosis, that it's the organ of gnosis.
Mm.
But he was very clear to differentiate between sort of fantasy and imagination, in this sense, the creative imagination, which is the imaginal. He called it the
Yeah,
imaginal.
well, Coleridge had made that distinction 200 years ago, precisely between fantasy is simply uh, take some wild elements, put them together. Purple octopus rides on back of crab on a roller skate. Yeah, it's imaginative, but it's meaningless.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas this, the
No,
creative
imagination is the
imagination.
actual embrace of the whole picture. How it comes out in imagery depends on what your mind is stocked with.
Yes, but it's also.
How much training you have in communication of your imagination.
But for them, it's even more than that. That it is the Gnostic
Yes,
facility.
because it's the creative. It is the creative impulse itself. It should have said at the beginning of Genesis, God imagined and there was a world.
Yes.
Blake did this wonderful little engraving of a man standing on Earth, uh, gazing at the moon, and there's
Mm-hmm.
a ladder that he projects to the moon,
Mm-hmm.
and the caption is "I want, I want." Now, if you want to go to the moon, you can get there. All you've got to do is imagine the possibility, and if you want it badly enough, it will eventually happen. Now, that's
Not.
that's the imagined concept. I mean, obviously, Yoko Ono thought it could be applied to a sort of a peaceful new world, and to a degree, it can. And for some years, we even heard American presidents talk about, "I think I'm going to give peace a chance." And
Yes.
so it did inform the culture.
Yeah, and in that sense, similar to Blake, because I mean,
Yes,
Blake
and
was
I think
clearly.
John
Yeah.
Lennon and Sid Barrett, they were all kind of, skirting on the sidelines. They fell. They got and poor Sid never got up again, as so
Mhm.
many. John, I think, was well on his way back up to the right pitch. That's my first personal view.
Absolutely. But I mean, it's interesting that he was born under a great conjunction. He was born in the same
October
year.
9th.
Yes, and in the year of a great conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn. So yeah, we're kind of come full circle
Very
in
interesting,
that.
isn't it? Isn't that
Yeah,
interesting?
yeah,
I
very
noticed
interesting.
that because, yeah, the supernova explodes on October 9th,
Yes, it
1606.
does. Yes, it does.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and it's kind of when those sort of things happen that you can understand why people were so awestruck when you had these three events, because they are just things that you cannot explain.
Yes, but I think it would be very rational and proper to say, hang on a minute, nothing exploded on October the 9th, 1604. The actual event we saw as a supernova happened presumably millions of years before. Um, its
It did,
light, but its
but it,
light reached us at that point. But maybe that's the
yes,
critical factor.
exactly, and it's the observer. You're participating in the event.
Mm,
So it's not just what's happening in the cosmos, it's you are participating in that event, and it's the two things coming together
yeah.
that create this sort of this miracle, or um this seeing, this
Yeah,
revelation.
you're talking about what I mean. Aleister Crowley would have called cosmic consciousness,
Absolutely.
which is, is a leap of faith that the cosmos is not just all methane and dust, but has an eternal or fundamental, obscure, but is meaningful and
Indeed.
determinative. It's a very hard one. Nowadays, because I've swallowed so many wretched astronomy science programs, I think of it as just a horrible, violent mess of, you know, solar systems allegedly imploding, dark stars, dark matter. It's all bloody dark, which
Yes.
isn't an inspiring thought.
Patrick Curry would call it disenchantment.
Yes, of
And
course, it is. It's that movement of disenchantment, and it's difficult not to be affected by. I've certainly been affected by it.
mm,
Maybe too much knowledge or the wrong kind of knowledge. Probably watched too many news programs.
well, I think it has more to do with manufactured cynicism. It's manufactured nihilism. It has to do with our culture and our milieu, which is disenchanting. And I think if we were taken back to a time like 1623 or 1603, it would be we would see why the sort of the touch paper got lit, and I think we would get re-enthused quite quickly, and I think it's very easy to forget that. But having had the sort of a similar journey myself, um, and kind of coming full circle, I would say that disenchantment is sort of like being in the cave, or like the man in the jail who just needs to sort of reconnect again to that rope of Sophia, and all it takes is a couple of these, what Patrick again would call experiences of wonder that you can't explain rationally, where the connection is not just in your mind,
Well, I
significance
think
and
that's what
meaning.
the people who liked the Rosicrucian furore, who were positive about it, what I think they were trying to recover that. I think there was a
Yes,
kind of widespread feeling that this disenchantment you talk about was
yes,
actually on
yes,
the horizon,
that's
which
right.
in fact, of course, it was.
Yes, because I had so many wars going on, and there was sort of plagues and
Yeah.
poverty, and so that's
Well,
why I
I don't
feel.
blame people for wanting the end of the world if you were acquainted with the treatment of heretics and witches, and
Mhm.
what was actually going on in the 30 Years' War was barbaric in the extreme, and the total dislocations in agricultural life, flooding, destroyed
Yes.
villages, whole ecologies of cities and towns being destroyed by rampaging armies and so forth.
Mhm.
No, it was appalling.
And yes, and then along comes like a supernova and these great conjunctions, and they're sort of undeniable. And I think that's what reignites that sense of hope, which then gets sort of taken up in different ways by different people. But nonetheless, I mean, when I sort of came across your story of the invisible history of the Rosicrucians, I kind of thought this is sort of similar to the Renaissance after sort of a period of like the Dark Ages type of thing, where this knowledge comes back, this perennial philosophy comes back into the culture and it revives everything. Suddenly there's this kind of resurgence.
Do you
And
feel that's occurring now?
I think
I know there are plenty of people out there writing on these subjects. I think generally badly. It's always been, of course, a setting for charlatans and
yes.
people who have too many opinions but inadequate knowledge. And that's what Kepler's saying at the beginning. Just
Yes.
it could be God's sign, but let God have his way and not impose something over it, if you like. He was probably as excited as anybody.
I'm sure, but wanted to sort of measure what he said, which I think would be admired today by people like you and me, rather than sort of going out on social media and kind of like making great prophecies and that kind of thing, which
yes, you're right,
don't sort of come true. Because I mean, there's a lot of apocalypticism around now and this kind of frenzy of conspiracy theories and that kind of thing. But underneath it, like certainly when we got to, I felt, and I think a lot of people did, when we got to 2020 and we had the great conjunction then between Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, a lot of people were very hopeful. And at that point, things seemed to be going in a very hopeful direction. Only for things to sort of yes, and only for things to sort of go wrong in 2022. But to me, I feel that there is that hunger, there's that desire underneath it all, even though things appear to have gone wrong, where people are almost it's allowing people to become more discerning about what information they do take in.
Yes, I think so, but I don't know. Can podcasts save the world?
Well, we can all try. We
have to try, and nobody knows actually how these things will develop.
That's right.
This is a very fecund and very fertile movement, and it's not over. There's this, I guarantee, is for sure.
Yes, I think maybe another discussion is in order at some point, but. Gosh, I really appreciate.
I'm just about to start my 29th commissioned book.
Oh, what's this one going to be on? Are we allowed to know?
Well, there's another. I don't want to talk about the one I'm starting soon. Because next year I've got another book out called The Celestial Realms: A History of Heaven from Before the Dawn of Time.
Ah, sounds just up my street.
Well, I think it should be.
Yes.
It should be some happy material for you there. Yeah,
I think so. Definitely.
Completely cross-cultural, it's every part of the world, from the Inuit of Alaska to South American pre-Columbian cultures, Africa, China, Japan, everywhere where there's any evidence for belief in heaven or hell is in the book. Everywhere, and all religions throughout the world.
Well, it sounds wonderful, and it reminds
traditions, just folk tradition and so forth. I realised nobody had ever done. I couldn't believe as far as I knew, nobody had ever done this.
Yes, it sounds marvelous, and I'd love to have you back on when you've finished that, because I'm sure there's plenty of rich material that we can talk about in terms of not just astrology but cosmology and the magic of the cosmos.
As we've heard in this episode, and as Tobias so clearly shows in his book, the Rosicrucian Brotherhood was a fiction. There were no real Rosicrucians, and therefore no conspiracy of invisible Illuminati working behind the scenes, or secret society that could be joined, because it didn't exist, not literally anyway. Although the Order of the Rose Cross never had any physical existence, certainly not during the 16th or 17th centuries, the Gnostic and Hermetic ideas that found their way into Johann Valentin Andrea's work, especially when coupled with the powerful astrological events of 1602 to 1623, did bear fruit. The spirit or egregore of Rosymania, with its emphasis on the thought of the heart, best personified by the figure of Sophia, would go on to inspire several influential thinkers and movements, including alchemists like Michael Meyer and Elias Ashmole, astrologer physicians like Robert Flood and William Lilly, Protestant pietists like Johannes Arndt, and educational reformers like Joachim Mauritius and Comenius, the father of modern education. It also led to the rise of several esoteric societies later during the 18th and 20th centuries, such as the Order of the Golden Dawn and the modern-day Rosicrucian Order, whose present-day incarnation bears no real ties to the original Tübingen Circle. All of which stands as a testament to the evocative resonance of the symbols and imagery associated with the perennial wisdom. It's also proof of the enduring power of art and the creative imagination that helped to keep this tradition alive through the ebbs and flows of human history, in spite of the oscillations between religious fanaticism and cerebral secularism that have come to be associated with the cycles of Jupiter and Saturn. And in this sense, perhaps people like Jung and Edith Hoffer are right when they say that the images and iconography in these texts, just like archetypes or egregores, have an agency and intelligence of their own, beyond that of the individuals who continue to be touched by them. And so their destiny will always be to break free of their human avatars or scribes, and like Rosymania or even Beatlemania, replicate and then spread through the culture like a virus or strands of DNA, carried along by waves of infectious enthusiasm that both inspire and move their adherents, sometimes pushing them to the very edge of reason. For as Tobias writes, games with archetypes and mythology can be very powerful indeed. They may reach into the parts of our being over which we have no conscious control. And if we're unprepared for these kinds of transpersonal and often initiatory experiences, we may fall under the spell of archetypal possession or become consumed by the dragon of the unconscious, a victim of our own traumas or self-delusions. For such journeys, as the alchemists tell us, are both difficult and dangerous, with the potential to either heal or harm, as Carl Jung discovered during his creative illness, a period he later called his most difficult experiment, when he consciously chose to engage with the images and symbols that arose from his unconscious and from the world around him, thus turning what could have become a breakdown into a breakthrough. John Lennon and Princess Diana, two icons born under Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions on the other hand, weren't so lucky. You could argue that the collective archetypes or public icons they came to embody for others ultimately consumed them. So perhaps that's why men like Jung and Kepler attempted to walk the tightrope between faith and reason, mysticism and science, astronomy and astrology, striving to maintain a healthy degree of discernment and stay grounded, whilst also wholeheartedly and open-mindedly exploring uncharted territory, thus trying to avoid falling prey to either mindless superstition or modernist self-policing, in some cases more successfully than in others. In this sense, perhaps the biggest lesson we can draw from the Rosicrucian experience is this: to learn to gracefully hold the tension between the archetypal energies of Jupiter and Saturn, to stay away from extremes, not becoming crazy curiosi on one hand or disenchanted nihilists on the other, and in group settings, to think carefully about which egregores we choose to cultivate or entertain and which we don't.